Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my book review of the book Darth Maul, Shadow Hunter by Michael Reaves. This is part of my read-through of the entire of the EU. I'm trying to get through all the novels. I'd surprisingly not read any of Michael Reaves' book despite him writing or co-writing like 8 books in the EU, so I have to read the rest of his books. But if they're anything like this, it's gonna be worth it because this book's awesome. So I started here. This is a standalone book. This is really what I would describe is this book is like a horror thriller type book where the monster is Darth Maul. And some of the book is from his perspective, but a lot of the book is from the people he's hunting's perspective, which makes it really fascinating. And the book is written so fast, and the book is just such a propulsive story that it just carried from one chapter to the next to the next. Rarely does a book feel like I gotta keep reading, because I have to know what happens. And this is, it's a book about Darth Maul hunting some people. You pretty much, and it's set right like weeks, if not days, before the events of The Phantom Menace. So you kind of know where the story's gonna go. You know what certain outcomes have to happen, and yet you spend the time, 1, wanting to know how they happen, and 2, maybe Michael Reaves is gonna find a way out of this. Maybe there's another opportunity available, and you spend the time just wishing that there was a better end for these characters, and it is just so fantastically handled. It is, as I mentioned, it's a very short book. I was able to read it in 2 sittings. I read for about an hour and a half in the morning, and then I went and got lunch and stuff, and then came back in the afternoon and read another hour and a half, and I was able to finish the book. It's, this kind of large font, large spacing with the font, so it's surprisingly short of a book. I think that if they had it the same font as the other books, it'd probably be like 250 pages probably instead of 300. It's surprisingly short. But it's worth it. It's such a fun story. So often, some of these stories you just, like I just read a story recently for Star Wars, a couple stories actually, that I was just like, this is a chore. I don't care about this. You're taking too long. There's too much time spent here. I just want to read a fun, quick story. This is a fun, quick story. It's really thriller based, which I really like, and I'm hoping that Michael Reaves' other books are written like this, because if that's the case, I'm going to love his books, I think. You follow a Jedi Padawan who is sent to go retrieve this this Black Sun informant who is basically almost like a whistleblower for the Black Sun, and she's supposed to get him, and chaos ensues and stuff happens, and she ends up involved in the main story. You also follow a Nemoidian who has information on the Naboo Trade Federation blockade that's about to happen, and so he's trying to get that information to someone important to A, sell it, and B, to try to stop it. And then you have this bounty hunter who is hired by the Nemoidians to go after this rogue Nemoidian, and then like Newt Gunray hires this bounty hunter, and then you also have a kind of like a middleman, as I would describe him, and Lauren Pavan, and Lauren is a middleman who is trying to take information from one person and sell it off to the next person. That's basically what he does, him and his droid I-5, and he is trying to get the information from the Nemoidian and get it to someone important. And then, of course, Darth Maul is hunting the Nemoidian who has the information and hunting anyone else who might learn the information. And so it becomes a game of who's going to get to the Nemoidian first. And it was just so excellently paced, so excellently written. I didn't know who was going to die when. I didn't know if the characters were even going to die. And then slowly, when you start seeing the pieces come together and certain events would happen, I'd be like, oh no, in the next chapter, this character's a goner, because there's no way they survive this. And then I was right. And I was like, this is just so excellently like horror thriller based. It's not particularly like scary, like, oh, I couldn't stand to read this. Like, a teenager could read this and have a blast with it. Even I would say even a preteen could read it, but it's kind of the pacing and the structure is kind of like that. And it's such a fun, the action in here is so simple, and yet it is fun to read. And also there is something in here, and it's hard to describe for you what I mean by this, but I think if you read the book, you'll get it. there is just a certain level of vocabulary that Michael Reaves has. A lot of times when he's using adjectives or even verbs for things, sometimes occasionally nouns, he will substitute in a really high level vocabulary word, but he doesn't do it all the time, so it never feels pretentious, and it never feels ponderous. It never feels like, man, I'd have to go look up these words. He uses it when you would know exactly what word would need to go there, what description or what adjective, whatever it is, you would know what would fit in that phrase, and yet he chooses that moment to use the high-level vocabulary word. And I thought that was a brilliant choice because I kept reading these brilliant words, which I know, but I was thinking if I didn't know what that word is, I would know exactly what it meant after reading this because his context clues and the way he writes perfectly lent to an explanation for it. So I thought he did a tremendous job with vocabulary, which I don't normally talk about in my book reviews. I'm talking about enjoyment and fun, but man, that stood out to me when I was reading this book. And, the characters, I really came to be interested in them. The idea of the Jedi character, Darsha. Anyway, I really was invested in her, and I was just like, I hope she survives. I hope she becomes a Jedi Knight, but she might not because Maul's hunting her. And you had Lauren Pavan. And also I was wondering, how are they going to get the information? What's going to happen to it? Because we know that the blockade happens. We know that Darth Maul survives. We know that the information about the Sith does not get out. So how does this all resolve itself? And there was one moment a character bumps into another character thinking that the day is saved. But I knew instantly, the day's not saved. That's not who you want to bump into. And I was like, oh, that's so cleverly written. And also because this book came back in 2001, you didn't know certain things about where the story was going in the prequels later on, even though if you were paying attention, you kind of knew where things were going. But there were just some really subtle things, particularly around Palpatine. There's a few subtle things about Palpatine that was like, that's really clever. And also just, the political stuff that's happening, I just love. This book kind of serves as an interesting counterpart to the book Cloak of Deception, which is somewhere on my shelves. Yes. So if you read Cloak of Deception by James Luceno, that is a political thriller. It's emphasis on the political idea. This is an action thriller, a horror action thriller, emphasis on the horror action. There are political elements in this, but it's mostly horror action, whereas the Cloak of Deception is a political thriller, emphasis on the political, and it has a tiny bit of thriller action stuff in it. But both of them are excellent compliments to Phantom Menace. If you want an excellent book set before Phantom Menace, it entirely takes place on Coruscant, I think you're going to love this book. I certainly did. I think this is the best Star Wars book I've read this year, to be honest, and I had a blast with it. So that's why I'm going to give it like a 9.3 out of 10. I loved it. So if you've read Darth Maul Shadowhunter, let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. Did you love it as much as I did, or did you just think it was all right? Let me know your thoughts. Most people I know love this book, but let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.